All right, let's see. I think I'm live. Hello. Here comes another episode of Tips for Confident Norwegian. And this time, I would really love to talk to you about a topic that is very relevant for myself personally as a learner of a language like Norwegian or of anything else for that matter. And it's a topic that my students have been picking up quite a lot, and people who interact with me online, people have been asking me about this, or it's been a topic that has been popping up quite a lot recently. And that's the topic of distractedness and not really being able to focus on your Norwegian studies the way you would like to. And I think that can be various roots to this issue, and I have quite a lot of experience with actually solving this one for myself. And I solved it quite accidentally without meaning to solve it. Then I realized in retrospect that I did solve this one, that it's not an issue for me anymore on the practical level and also not on the emotional level anymore, right? Because the thing with being distracted when you want to study Norwegian, as an example, yeah, because that's what we're talking about, that the biggest problem is on the emotional level, that you're gonna blame yourself for this, right? It makes us feel bad. It makes us feel like a failure, which, as you know, if you've been following me for some time, is really, really bad for your learning, right? If you consider yourself a failure, if you have these feelings of like, oh my God, again, I have failed, I can't do this, then your affective filter rises and you are not learning as efficiently, even if you are learning and focusing. So these kind of emotions that kind of that the process of feeling that you're failing when you're being distracted all over again, these emotions that this process breeds, they kind of enter the vicious circle and make it even worse, right? So it's good to fix it on the practical level, so that the fact that you might be a distracted person in general, for example, is not a problem anymore. And it's very good as well to get it fixed on the emotional level, as in stop blaming yourself for it, because that's making your results worse. Yeah, the sole fact that you're blaming yourself or feeling like a failure. All right, so let's have a look at this issue, distractedness, when learning Norwegian. I have noted some points here, and the first thing that I would like to kind of dissect is that we have to realize that learning is repetition. All right, anything we learn at the end of the day, we have done multiple times. And I'm not talking about memorizing something for a test and then vomiting it into the test the next day. That's not learning, yeah? Or maybe it is short term learning, but it is not acquisition. When we are talking about learning Norwegian, we are after acquisition, not just learning, as in memorizing, and then I put it in the test, I get my grade, and I don't care, right? I do care. I do care about half a year from now, because I want to still be using these things that I invest my time into today. And if this is what my goal is, I have to realize that repetition is the name of the game, and spaced repetition for that matter. So it doesn't matter how many times I repeat it when memorizing. The number of sessions is what matters, right? And these sessions can be super short. I just have to realize that doing it once, even if I manage to focus, and especially if I can't quite focus the way I would like to, is not gonna do the trick. And knowing this is very, very, very important. It's crucial for our kind of mental state when learning, right? Because, like I was saying, if I do something once, like for example, I study some Norwegian grammar, and I'm like, I think I probably understand, but I can't really get into the depth, and maybe it's complex and I can't really drop it. I'm just like, I have to nail the whole thing, right? Because this is the name of the grammar in the grammar book. I have to do the whole like lead setting business, for example, when actually you could just do a tiny little bit, right? You don't have to cover the whole thing. But we have these ambitions and we like, this is it, right? It took me so much time, so much procrastination to get to this session. So we have the expectation super high of nailing everything, covering the whole phenomenon, right? And this is really not how it works at all when your end goal is that you want it for the long term and you want it for practical usage, right? So we sit there, we study, we grind, we keep getting distracted because, of course, it's horrible. Yeah, unless you are a language nerd like myself, you're probably not going to like super like sitting and studying something like grammar for a long time and expecting yourself to nail it perfectly, right? So you're probably going to kind of hate it. And that's how you get even more distracted because anything counts. And then when you want to use it 2 days later, you discover that it's not there, right? Or that maybe the thing you thought you understood, now you see an example in practice and you're like, aha, so maybe I did not understand it, right? So that's the thing. So instead of having the bar super high and thinking that now I have to do a session of as long as necessary until I understand it, until I have memorized this whole vocabulary list or whatever it might be, right? Maybe we should think 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I'll just have a look at a tiny little bit. And then I'll do the same thing 2 days later, and then 2 days later, and then 2 days later. And if the bar is considerably lower, because I'm not expecting this session to be the session that will fix this thing once and for all, and otherwise it doesn't count and it's a failure, right? If I'm expecting that there will be iterations, that there will be repetition, I am much more easygoing and there is much more resistance around entering that session as well. Yeah. So that's around like the procrastination and around the initial focus of gathering your thoughts and really starting to do it. Yeah. Hello, Tammy. Lovely to see you. Hello. Yes. So this was the first point, that we have to count with the fact that it's all repetition and it's gonna be repetition if we want it or not. Now, we also have to take the pressure off. And this is my second point that I want to dive deeper into. I have kind of alluded to it already that as adults, and especially as educated adults, as professionals, as people who maybe are quite successful in your careers, right? You are kind of expecting yourself to perform. And this is really not compatible with the fact that the learning, in terms of really acquiring it, is a long-term process of your brain understanding that you mean it and then that this is really really important to you and kind of letting it into the long-term memory and acquiring it, automating it, right? This is a long-term process and it does require the repetition and the iterations and in multiple contexts. And if we have so much pressure for that one session that it has to be perfect or that it has to be focused, right? If we are blaming ourselves for the distractedness in the first place, then again, we are starting this vicious circle of having negative emotions involved, which make everything worse, make our motivation much worse. We will procrastinate even much more if there is anxiety or anything like that. Because procrastination, at the end of the day, like the reason why we procrastinate is because we have anxiety, right? We don't want to do that thing in the first place because maybe we feel like we will fail in a way, right? And like this fact that I keep getting distracted when I really want to super focus, that's like it's a possible failure on the horizon, yeah, for many of us. And we need to take this pressure off. We need to take it down because we don't have to understand everything in that one session. And we also don't have to do this thing called learning Norwegian or understanding grammar in the quote unquote right order. Because many of us have attended courses, and most courses, most textbooks that are on the market today follow a present, practice, produce structure. And what this means is that first a phenomenon gets presented. Like there is a grammar box in the textbook, or like the teacher explains the phenomenon on the whiteboard, right? So first you have the presentation, or maybe there is a vocabulary list, or there is a text that you take the vocabulary from. Then there is the practice part, which is, for example, the teacher tests the class, or they offer an exercise. Exercises in the workbook are like a typical kind of manifestation of the practice phase, right? Or maybe there is a vocabulary exercise filling in the gaps, or maybe like matching, whatever it might be, right? And then there is the produce part sometimes, and that's like, now you have the topic, here is the vocabularists speak or write, yeah, something like that. And this structure, it's not in particular shown by research to be super effective for the long term, but it's a structure that's easy to use. It makes sense. It makes sense to the student and to the teacher. It kind of keeps the lesson going, right? So it's used a lot. And many people believe that just because the textbook is built up this way, it should work, right? But again, this kind of covers up the fact that you would need more iterations than just this. It might work for the practice part or even for the produce part in the lesson. But then what? Then you go home. Then you talk to your neighbor and it's not there, right? Maybe something is, but most of it isn't, because it just happened once, right? You did have some repetition within that one session, but really, you would need that spaced repetition, some spaces in between, maybe a day or two of a break, then go again. Not like make it a 20-minute focused session on this one thing and expect yourself to nail everything, right? And back to the distractedness part. But I'm aware that I'm getting distracted here from the main topic, which is distractedness. And I'm going a little bit away to like procrastination, which is a bit more general, or to this concept of space repetition as such. It's all interconnected and it's all important. But to get back to this taking off of the pressure, taking down, lowering the pressure on yourself, that you have to do it right in a way, because this session is the session and you need to focus, you need to get it right. Sometimes what is the biggest problem for your focus is the present phase of the paradigm. And again, this paradigm is artificial, is devised for teaching convenience. I think the people who devised it believed that it would work, but it kind of like, it doesn't work any better than other paradigms. It's not been shown by research to work better in practice, yeah? So it's better only for teaching convenience, actually. But we think that it must be like that because we've seen it so many times. So we would believe that if we do not pull through the present phase, that means if we don't listen to a lecture first, or if we do not study the grammar box in the textbook first, or if we don't read about the grammar, or at least if we don't watch any YouTube video about the grammar, then we cannot learn it, right? Because like suddenly we are doing it wrong. If I just skip to the exercises, I must be wasting my time because I haven't really understood what I was doing. And to be able to do the exercises right, I have to first understand, right? I have to do the present phase first. And this is a trap, isn't it? Because the present phase is the thing that most of us want to skip. Like I don't. I enjoy sitting in like linguistic lectures, right? But that's maybe like 2-3% of the population who are like me in this sense, right? If you are not like me, if you are like most people, then grammar or particular vocabulary or something is really not your thing. You don't want to sit there for 20 minutes and listen to a teacher or study a grammar box. That's heavy. And of course, you're gonna be getting distracted. Of course, when your teacher is preaching about the grammar and you're like, this all looks so abstract and actually it's a bit too much anyhow, I don't even understand all of it, and like, oops, I accidentally fell asleep and I was thinking of what I was gonna make for dinner, right? And then you start blaming yourself. It's my fault. Oh my god. Maybe it's not your fault. Maybe you just hate that kind of present phase of the grammar. And the good news is, and the practical tip is that you can skip it, or you can flip it the other way around, right? So you could, and this is what I do recommend a lot to my students, and especially to students who I see have maybe a little bit of an issue going on, or they tell me like, I have ADHD, right? Or I, like myself, I think I never got diagnosed or anything, but I have a lot of ADHD like symptoms going on. So like, for me as well, even though I love grammar, sometimes it's just difficult, or sometimes it's not the thing you want to do. Sometimes you just cannot zoom in and start reading that grammar box or that text about it, or watching a lecture and fully focus on it. What you can do instead is just to throw it away and go directly to the exercises. And then maybe not the workbook, because if your struggle is getting distracted, then maybe writing down in a monotonous way on a monotonous page is not going to be very helpful, right? Because there is a lot and you're like, oh, it's a kilometer to the bottom of the page and you can't seem to do it. But if you, instead of that, and then checking the answer key manually, right, and then you never even get to checking it, so this is not good for distractedness if it's not your thing. But if instead you invest something like, I don't know, 150 kroner or whatever it costs for a school year, and buy a subscription to one of these online resources, right? There used to be free ones as well. Now there is much less. There are still some free resources, even though not so many anymore. But if you buy a subscription from Couple and Dam, right, you make a private user, you just shop in their e-shop, and you can buy something at your level or something in general, something that's pertinent to norskprøve, and it's really cheap. Much cheaper than a textbook, for example. And you might not need the textbook at all. You might just need the resource, right? And then when you're like, oh, I want to study and I want the grammar is there in the resource, right? Instead of expecting yourself of first doing the pre-study, doing the present phase that is most kind of risky for you to get distracted when you're doing that, you can go to the resource and just do the exercises. And what's better about it than the workbook is that it's less monotonous, it's more interactive. Yeah, it's not like gamified or anything, it's not like Duolingo, but it has one task on the screen and you do it. You check your answer, it tells you right or wrong. If it's wrong, you like, show me the faucet, right? And you have a look at it and you have one sentence in there, or maybe two, or maybe like a small exercise, and you look at it, you check it, and you're like, why? Maybe you take some notes, maybe you take some screenshots and put them into a folder, and then you go to the next. You don't have to overthink it, right? You don't have to figure the whole bloody business out. You're just here for a maybe 15-minute session of doing these exercises because you want to understand this phenomenon better. And sometimes even you don't have to have a particular phenomenon in mind. I just like binging these things. I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm in the mood for some studies. I just open the exercises. I don't even care what it is. Yeah. So again, taking the pressure off for the session to be the perfect session. That is the answer to everything, right? But you are just studying, just doing something. And this might look inefficient because when we see structure and progression, then we're like, this, I'll follow the progression and I'll get there. But this again is a trap. It looks so neat, just like the present, practice, produce paradigm. It looks so neat, it looks so logical, it looks so linear, and it's nothing like what learning is inside your head, right? And I think all of us know this. True learning, the kind that gets turned into acquisition lower down the stream, the kind of learning that we can make use of half a year later naturally without thinking, that kind of learning is a hugely subconscious process that of course we can induce by conscious activity, but it happens subconsciously and it is super chaotic. And this is a frustrating fact for us adults. But knowing it, on the other hand, realizing it, and you don't have to trust me on this, you can just imagine yourself or feel through it yourself what your experience is, right? You've been learning stuff all the time, maybe at your workplace, you've been acquiring new protocols or whatever it might be. It's not like you sit down, you study, and then you practice, and then you produce or whatever. No, you go in iterations, you make a mistake, you ask a colleague, you ask another colleague, you forget it, you ask a third colleague because you don't want to ask that second colleague again so that they don't know that you forgot it. You know what I mean? This is how it works, yeah? And then suddenly, boom, it all connects, and you become a bit of an expert on that thing, actually, maybe, if you do it a lot, yeah? So this is how learning works inside of your head. So even if the exercises are not connected to a particular thing that fits into an imaginary progression that's probably based on your textbook anyway, which is arbitrary, right? It can be anything, and the thing that your brain chooses to remember there and then, that's a random choice. If you run it through your conscious mind, yeah, it's not your conscious mind choosing. Yeah, we would like to, but it's not like that. Okay, so take the pressure off. You don't have to understand everything in that one session because it's not the only one anyhow. And you don't have to do it in the right order, quote unquote, because there is no right order. Yeah, some orders are more beneficial for some purposes, like teaching convenience, than others. But the point that this is how your textbook presents it doesn't really mean that that's how it must be. Yeah. So that's my second point, I guess, that take that pressure off. It's very, very important that you do not feel that this has been a failure, this session, the way I'm designing it, as in I'm just gonna do some random exercises here, right? It's not good enough. Of course it is. It is good enough because at the end of the day, it is still random whatever passes into your long-term memory during this session. Yeah, it's still random. All right, and the last point that I want to dissect here is sacrifice quality and compensate with quantity. And this is a shout out to all of my students and to all of you who follow me, who I've talked to, who told me, like, look, I have ADHD. Look, I am a distracted person. I struggle with this. I have to think of it like a lot, like extra more than other people. How should I focus on the learning task when I actually can't focus, right? Now, I'm the kind of person who struggles to focus, right? I'm this kind of, oh, squirrel over there, like anything, just give me a distraction, I'm gonna use it. And I still do really well with languages, yeah, because it's my thing, I can like it. But I have noticed, and this is what I wanted to share with you, I noticed that there is a hack to bypass this distractedness. And that's like in combination with taking the pressure off, like I was saying, not expecting that this session has to yield the whole result and otherwise it's a failure. If you just maybe listen to something, or if you just binge those exercises without any expectation at all, and you do enough of that, it will work. And this was a discovery that I made when I had my children. And the first kid comes along, right? And he wants to breastfeed all the time for like hours, right? And I'm like, what am I gonna do, right? I was getting bored. And I figured out that maybe listening to something was a good use of my time. I didn't want to read or anything because I wanted to look at the baby and whatever, or it was at night or in the evening to put him to bed. And I was like, maybe if I listen to some podcasts, right? And then I started listening and I was picking various topics that were relevant to me. And I was listening a lot because suddenly I had a lot of activities or non-activities that were using my hands but not my intellect. So I was listening for hours on end in total. And I realized maybe a month later that I remember so much from these podcasts, like of facts, of hard facts. When somebody asked me about something, I was able to lecture on the topic, and I was never trying to learn it in the first place, right? So there was no pressure. And this was easy for me to achieve because this was just an activity for me back then to essentially kill time, or to distract myself or to entertain myself. But then I started picking topics that I was interested in. I was listening maybe like to learn more about language learning. Then I was listening to learn about various finance things, or about business, or about, I don't know, maybe the microbiome, like really random topics that I picked up as interesting topics for me. And for you, this can be Norwegian grammar, right? Or it can be just Norwegian podcasts to boost your vocabulary, just plain old input. Or it can be just binging those exercises in that exercise platform. Just like, okay, one, next, 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 next. Actually, I can like it. I like my tea that I've just made. I'm gonna take 5 more, and just go on, go on, go on. You don't care, right? This was very easy for me because these were random topics. If your goal is to learn Norwegian, maybe you have a deadline, then it's much harder for you. I recognize that, to relax your mind. And I think I wouldn't achieve that either if I was using it as a study technique. But I never wanted to study in the first place. I just wanted to entertain myself. I was interested in the topics. I wanted to know. But I realized in retrospect that I have learned so much. I was actually very knowledgeable on some of these topics after a month or two of listening. And I was like, wow, how did this happen? Like, I'm sleep deprived here, I just had a baby. I feel like the stupidest I ever felt in my life. And in spite of all that, I have learned tons of new facts and kind of random facts. I was interested in all of these, but still, I learned so much. And that's when I really, really started to dive into it with language learning as well. And I started listening in other languages more and more, in English, in Norwegian. And I started realizing that what was happening with me more and more was that I not only got knowledgeable on the topics without trying to, I also picked up the formulations that the speakers were using, right, in all these other languages. And this is what happens to you as well if you expose yourself to Norwegian input. And of course, these exercises, that's also input. Yeah, that's selected written input mostly. And these platforms, by the way, are good because they also have a lot of listening input. So you can listen to even parts of the exercises, or many of them have listening exercises and combine grammar or vocabulary plus listening exercises. So even though sometimes the topic is quite silly, the whole concept works well, and you can portion it, and you don't have to nail anything in particular in one session. Yeah, you can have small gains kind of distributed over a longer period of time. Yeah, just like me. And just as a side note, when I listened to the first podcast, for example, about a specialized topic, they would be using various terms and speaking about things, and we're like, I don't even understand what they talk about, right? And at the end, I remembered close to nothing. So that's like your one session, isn't it? And if I thought that this was it, I would have to consider myself a failure. And I probably would have. But as I was saying, my goal was not to learn anything in the first place. So I wasn't dissatisfied with myself. I was just like, oh, whatever, that was interesting. Yeah. But I realized that when I listened to another podcast, maybe with the same guest, he or she would repeat some of the things in the exact same way, because that's what they do, right? When they get invited to another podcast, or they would say something a little different, or they would speak about it from a different angle. And then I browsed and I found another speaker talking about the same topic, and some of the things they repeated. And with that spaced repetition going on, I kind of figured it out, like, oh, that's what they all speak about. That's what it means. And all these terms that everybody was using just like that became natural, right? They got normalized for me. And that, again, is what you want to do with your Norwegian grammar. If you binge that exercise and then you binge another one and another one, you might still not remember a lot of it, but some of it got normalized. Then you get to yet another exercise and you're like, oh, whoa, actually, this is starting to come up for me, right? So it really does happen with the iterations and putting them together and combining them. Yeah, it works like that. So you don't have to care at all, actually, about the quality of the one session, how much you focused, if you fell asleep, or if you started thinking of your lunch. Just listen to another one while making that lunch, right? And then you will remember more, you will understand more. So this compensation for quality, because sometimes my kid would need something from me and I would have to kind of do it, and I didn't have any hand that was freed so that I could stop the audio, so I would just be multitasking and not focusing properly. I didn't care, right? And if you don't care either, you won't get into the vicious circle of blaming yourself and considering it a failure. Just consider it work in progress, right? Then you can zoom back in when you've realized that you have zoomed out. Yeah. Or there will be another one. Or if you're watching videos about the grammar, maybe on YouTube, watch one. And if you're like, I'm not sure if I understood it, maybe I got distracted, you can watch it again, you can watch another one, you can just listen to it again while actually doing something around your flat, right? So you don't always have to try to focus, even, right? You can just kind of layer it on each other and compensate for the super focused quality that you might not be able to put in either with that quantity, right? And just so that this is said aloud, I'm not asking you to sit for hours and do it again, doing so much of it because you can't focus on the one thing. I'm really talking like, do these exercises in an online platform in iterations. Do a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, and just do not care so much about what comes out of each one of them, because they will add up. Yeah, knowing that can be very satisfying, and very, like, it can make it easier for you to process that you haven't got all of it on the first sitting. And the same with, for example, podcasts. Yeah, when you're listening to a podcast or re-listening to a children's series that you watched previously, just re-listen to it a week later, just without the picture, when actually making dinner or when cleaning in your house. We all have things that we do with our hands that we have to do anyway, like folding the laundry, right? It takes ages. You can just as well listen to something. And many of you say, like, my level isn't high enough yet to listen to podcasts. Fair enough. But just really take that children's series that you've been binging and maybe be a week behind and re-listen to it. You don't need the picture anymore. You will remember what it was. And again, you don't have to understand all of it at all. You just flood yourself and you compensate for the super focus with the quantity in the long run. Yeah. All right, so that was my third point. So let me just sum up all 3 points that I was dissecting today. Feel very free to get back to anything and to add questions under if you need to. The first point was that we have to realize that all learning, and especially the kind that we are after with learning Norwegian, is repetition. It stands and falls with the number of iterations that we put in, not the length or the quality of the one session that we are expecting to be perfect. Number 2, based on that realization, take off the pressure of, like, this has to be perfect, this is the only one, it has to give me ABC kind of result, otherwise it doesn't count and I'm a failure. Yeah, take that pressure off. Be like me when I wasn't trying to learn anything. You are trying to learn something, but sometimes you learn the best when you are not trying, when you put in the pleasure of doing it and you put in the genuine interest in the topic, maybe, and that's it. Yeah, there is no expectation. And then you are at the most easygoing state of mind, most open based on the affective filter, right? It's in your favor, and you actually end up learning the most when that wasn't your original goal, right? And then the third point, sacrifice the quality if necessary, and it sometimes is necessary for many of us, especially if you have ADHD or anything like that. It might be necessary if you have a lot of distractions going on in your life. It might be necessary if your only time to do the listening to Norwegian sources is actually when doing something else like the laundry or whatever. It is necessary. There isn't going to be full focus anyhow, right? Just sacrifice it with a light heart. It doesn't matter that much, and put in the quantity rather than stressing about the quality of each of the pieces. Yeah. All right, that was it. That's my best tips that have worked miracles for me. And like I was saying, I was lucky that I figured it out because it happened by accident. Yeah, I wasn't trying to learn, and I realized in retrospect that I learned so much by doing this. So hopefully this will help you. Let me know about any questions, or if you have any comments, put them under. I'll get back to you. I'll check better than last week, because last week I didn't get a notification and I found old comments today, but I'm gonna check manually. All right, have a beautiful day. It's very rainy here in Oslo, but hopefully it stops before our football training. And I'll see you next Wednesday for another topic in Tips for Confident Norwegian. Ha det bra.